A very good evening and a warm welcome to Biz in Focus. I'm Zinat Musafa. Joining us this evening is the chairman of the Colombo Rubber Traders Association, Mr. Amand Veerasinghe. Good evening, Mr. Veerasinghe.
Good evening.
And welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mr. Veerasinghe, last week the government instructed plantation companies to increase the wages of estate workers to 1,000 rupees. Now, the plantation sector, the rubber sector as well as all plantation sector companies already experiencing high labor costs. How is the rubber industry coping up?
It's going to be difficult because 60% of our costs, or at least the cost of production, is the cost of labor. So already the prices are quite low and not remunerative for the plantations. Therefore, it's going to be a tough ask, and I think it will be about a 10 billion rupee hit to the bottom line. I understand and appreciate the views of the government wanting to increase wages and give a better deal for the plantation workers, but at the same time it's important that the viability of the plantations are looked into as well.
Mr. Veerasinghe, now the plantation sector, as you said, they're experiencing high costs. So if the companies are to sustain profits, you either have to reduce the costs or increase the revenues, increase the margins. So what is your view on this?
It's one thing the plantations can do is to get their labor force to go out and tap at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, or go out in the fields at that time, like in Thailand, and therefore you will get a high increase in yield, and maybe that way the government can encourage, or when they sign, they have already got a collective agreement going up to 2021. So unfortunately, for whatever reason, they have decided to increase it to 1,000 rupees, and I think as we speak they are in discussion. So maybe one way of bargaining on the part of the plantations is to say, to agree to go to the fields at 3:30 in the morning or thereabouts when the yield is the highest from the rubber tree. So that way they could mitigate some part of their losses and get increased yields.
Mr. Veerasinghe, now rubber prices, how are they? How is the performance of rubber right now in the markets?
So currently crepe 1X, which is a premium grade of rubber that Sri Lanka produces, trades at about 340 rupees a kilo, but some of the costs, the production costs of some of the plantations are way above that. So unfortunately we have to follow the world markets. Even though we produce a premium rubber, we do have some niche markets that may be paying a premium over the world prices, but still it's below their cost of production. And unfortunately we have had 3 months of bad weather, continuous rain, which is not good for the plantations, for rubber plantations, because you can't harvest the latex. So that also has had a big effect on the production of rubber this last year.
Mr. Veerasinghe, now Sri Lanka currently is the 6th in production compared to other producing rubber countries. Now a few decades ago this was not the case. Sri Lanka was one of the leading rubber manufacturers. How did the industry basically decline over the years? What are the main reasons
I
for
think
it?
one is the land alienation, especially most of the rubber is grown in the western province, and lots of that land has gone for housing and industrial estates. So we have lost a lot of land. It's that more than losing position, we have lost our position because the other countries have had a bigger land bank to grow rubber, and we have it's been coming down rapidly in Sri Lanka because of the increase in population and development.
Mr. Veerasinghe, now one of the other factors that I believe the rubber industry is facing is the lack of labor, lack of skilled labor, is it, in that industry? So how exactly, what measures have you all taken to address this issue?
So we took this matter up I am coming from a meeting today, our monthly meeting, and in Cambodia they tap once in 5 days with stimulation, and they achieve the same yields as one. In Sri Lanka we tap every other day, and therefore that is one way of reducing your labor cost as well, because you need the labor going out to tap once in 5 days versus once every other day. So that is another way of reducing your costs, and it's been very successful in Cambodia. Therefore maybe we should go down that road as well.
When it comes to the tea industry, tea has made its brand name in the global market. What about rubber? Do you think there is a need for a brand name for the rubber industry as well in the global market?
Yes and no. I mean, few years ago we tried the plantations together with some USAID funding, tried to brand rubber, and it was a absolute failure. Call it Lanka preen, but it was an absolute failure. So we have gone back to trading rubber as 1X crepe rubber, and therefore branding, yes, in certain products like tea does work, but in the case of rubber I do not think so, unless you we do not produce enough to create a market, as I see it.
Due to low prices in rubber, people are uprooting rubber plantations and looking at alternatives. Would you mind elaborating on this?
Yes, I mean for starters, it takes 6 years for a rubber plantation to come into bearing, and that is a long wait for the smallholder of the plantations. Whereas if you plant oil palm, in 3 years you get your yields. So therefore, you have to, your cash flows improve in the 3rd year and not in the 6th year. So therefore, lots of these companies, and it is very profitable at the moment to grow oil palm in Sri Lanka. So therefore, and tea. So therefore, lots of these rubber plantations have uprooted their rubber and planted oil palm and or tea.
And with that, we are crossing over for a short commercial break. Stay tuned for more news after these commercials. Welcome back to Biz in Focus. Joining us this evening is the chairman of the Colombo Rubber Traders Association, Mr. Amanda Veerasinghe. Sir, we spoke about the rubber industry, we spoke about the declining prices. Now, could you elaborate on the importance of value addition in the rubber industry?
Yes, Sri Lanka has been famous for its latex industry, the glove industry and the solid rubber industry, and Michelin has bought our largest solid rubber manufacturer in Sri Lanka. So we have a global player in Sri Lanka. So we could encourage that, for which we need rubber, and unfortunately we need to grow rubber in the non-traditional areas, so that more people, there will be more rubber available for these companies, so that they can expand their markets and produce more tires for the global market.
Another issue because of course the declining rubber prices and the lack of production is that many companies tend to import rubber to the country. What is your view on this? Do you think we should stop this, or do you think we should impose more taxes to prevent
No, I certainly do not think we should stop the imports, because the global players need to source their rubber at the cheapest possible price for them to remain competitive, because out there we are competing with China, India, the same markets. So therefore, our value addition industry should be allowed to import their rubber from whatever country that produces the rubber at the lowest price, so that they can remain competitive. Unfortunately, sometimes they import a lot more rubber than they require, and therefore depresses the Sri Lankan market. That needs to be regulated to some extent, which can be easily done, but we should never stop the imports of rubber for the value addition industry.
Mr. Veerasinghe, now India, Malaysia and many Southeast Asian countries, they produce rubber at production levels exceeding Sri Lanka. Do you think, what do you think Sri Lanka lacks in order to come up to their standards?
So, as I said before, we are an island, and a small island. Therefore, the land area available for rubber growing is limited, but we have not explored the non-traditional areas. We have not explored other methods of, as I said before, tapping and to increase our yields, but definitely I think the state needs to look at rubber as a strategic crop, and then encourage the plantations to grow in non-traditional areas and help them and alienate some land for this purpose. That is how I see it.
Mr. Veerasinghe, also innovation and technology plays an important role in many of the sectors. Could you tell us how or what are the measures that the industry has taken so far to incorporate innovation and technology within the industry?
Sure. To start with, if you rain guard your trees, you can have a 20% increase in yield. Unfortunately, a lot of the plantation companies still haven't rain guarded most of their plantations. Some have embraced it, and almost the entire extent of land has been rain guarded, And you could see that in the auction, some of the plantation companies, even throughout these 3-4 months of rain, have been sending substantial volumes of rubber to the auctions, and they have benefited from that, whereas some of the other companies haven't. So, I urge them to rain guard all of their plantations, so that we will have an increased crop. That is one, and as I said before also, the tapping methods need to be changed. There are lots of lack of labor in some areas. So, then you can go start tapping once in 5 days and hopefully get the same yield.
Mr. Veerasinghe, now you are the chairman of the Colombo Rubber Traders Association. Yes. Would you mind talking about your association's the role it plays in the industry?
Yes, so we have completed 100 years of our association, and we have been trading rubber and providing a very visible, transparent market mechanism for the plantations, and it has been working for 100 years very successfully. I have always discussed this with our members. Do we change or continue with the same thing we have been doing for another 100 years? I have not had much feedback, but I think it has been a very successful way of trading rubber. They get paid in 7 days, very, as you know, getting paid for your produce or for your whatever you produce has been a problem for many of the other industries, whereas we regulate it, and within 7 days, like the tea industry, all the sellers get paid. So, it is their cash flows are not strained as a result. So, the auction system has been working for 100 years. Maybe it is time to change, but we are going down the road to see whether it needs to be changed. So far the feedback has been no, we continue with the same system that we have been having for the last 100 years.
Mr. Veerasinghe, could you mind elaborating on this auction system? How exactly is the process? And
yes, so you get to see the rubber in form of samples on your catalog 2 days prior to the auction, and then you go to the auction and buy the rubber based on your grading at the auctions. And once the hammer comes down, that lot is yours, and you got to pay for it in 7 days, and then the rubber is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Veerasinghe. And with that, we are crossing over for a short commercial break. We have more business news lined up for you after these commercials.
As you know that Sri Lanka regained GSP Plus facility from 2017 May. After that, we have seen a gradual increase in certain product sectors compared to the period that we did not have GSP Plus. So that period is that, as you know, initially we received the GSP Plus in 2005, then it continued till 2010, and then this continued from 2010 to 2017. So if you look at some of the product sectors that we export, we utilize almost 100% of the entitlement. That means when they are GSP entitled, we make full use of that facility. And unfortunately, the apparel industry, which is the largest export industry of Sri Lanka, benefit only by half of that. In other words, about half of the apparel that we export cannot claim that duty-free benefit simply because we are unable to meet the rules of origin criteria specified under the EU GSP Plus rules of origin. The rules of origin is there to ensure that products which have acquired the origin status, or either they could be wholly obtained like spices, seafood and things like that produced in Sri Lanka entirely, or products that we manufacture according to certain set of criteria which are specified in the EU legislation. It could be either a certain value addition percentage or a certain manufacturing process. In the case of apparel, we are supposed to satisfy what we call a double transformation criteria, which means that we cannot import fabric and then make into a piece of apparel. There's only one transformation there, fabric into apparel. So double transformation means you have to start the production process one stage prior to fabric, that is yarn. So we have to import yarn, make that into fabric and then into apparel. So if we can do that, then we are entitled to the GSP plus, that means duty-free market taxes. But if you look at the rate of utilization in the apparel sector, that remains somewhere around 47-48% for the time being, simply because of the fact that half of our apparel are made of imported fabric. That disqualifies half of our apparel exports. So as a result, if you look at the overall utilization ratio of Sri Lanka in the EU GSP plus, the overall comes again 57-58%. Because although we utilize 100% in almost 100% in other product sectors, the fact that apparel accounts for nearly 60% of our total exports, and that accounts for only for half of that particular segment, the overall utilization ratio comes down. So this is a big problem. So in order to overcome this, we have made a submission with Indonesia, because we have a thing called cross-regional accumulation. We from the SAARC region, Indonesia in ASEAN region can enter into a sort of understanding and make a joint submission asking EU to recognize under cross-regional accumulation that Sri Lankan apparel makers can import Indonesian fabric. So then you overcome that double transformation requirement, and then EU will accept that, because Indonesia is a GSP beneficiary, we are a GSP plus beneficiary. Then this regulation provides for cross-regional accumulation. So we have made this submission to the European Commission in 2018 and waiting for a response from them. If they approve that one, then there will be kind of new lease of life to the apparel sector. We should be able to import fabric from Indonesia wherever applicable, wherever our apparel makers find it suitable for their buyers' requirements, and then overcome that double transformation requirement and enhance our utilization. The other sectors that I told you, the fish, for example, utilize almost 98%, coffee about 75%, then rubber and articles thereof about 96% again, very high rates of utilization. So what we see at the moment is there is a small, how do I say, the relatively smaller segments in our, say, export basket, they benefit from this one, but simply because of this apparel situation, we remain, the utilization ratio remain rather low. That's the situation that we have to address. Say Sri Lanka loses its GSP plus status. You call that a graduation. So as he is considering the Sri Lanka's GNI, based on World Bank figures, we are supposed to be graduating, so we will be ending this period at the end of 2022. That means beginning 2023, we should be out of the GSP plus benefits. Out of the GSP plus benefits means we will also be out of standard GSP as well. But we do not see that the apparel industry will leave Sri Lanka simply because we don't get the GSP plus or GSP after 2023. Because that kind of situation we already experienced when we lost GSP plus in 2010. Under normal GSP, the standard GSP, although we had that during that period standard GSP, the apparel was not receiving duty-free benefits. They received some reduced margin or the margin of preference, but not complete duty-free. But we later, gradually we saw again we are adapting that situation. So we have been doing okay afterwards, and then therefore we do not see a scenario where our apparel industry will have a situation to, not all of course, some to wind up their operations and go to another country in 2023. The fish industry is a sector actually which suffered quite a lot on two reasons. One is there was a ban. You remember that we had some issues with regard to this IUU fishing ban introduced by the EU. We had to work with them, and then we managed to get that lifted. And then we had also the GSP not being given to us. So we were having those situations at time. But the seafood sector will have some impact when if we lose GSP, and then we are in the process of making a submission in order to requesting the EU to consider retaining this, because Sri Lanka, although our the GNI or the gross domestic production or the value will be above the threshold. In other words, although we will be classified as upper middle income country, our vulnerability, that means our dependency on few products, few export markets, etc., will still continue. And then therefore we are requesting, our submission, what we want to highlight is, don't simply look at the GNI or the GDP, consider these facts as well. And Sri Lanka is also a country which has gained a name in sustaining high ethical manufacturing practices. And also we are promoting green technology. We have some of the apparel sector companies who are actually world first in this totally carbon free the industry. So we would like to highlight all these achievements in our submission and request that they consider special concession towards country like us who will still have. 2024, EU will be revising their GSP scheme. Not only for us, overall. They have that system periodically, they look at the existing GSP scheme and then they introduce certain changes, considering this dynamics in the world trade. So like that, they are going to introduce a newer scheme in 2024, and then they will open period time for the public comment, so the people to make representations. Like the countries which benefit from GSP have an opportunity to make a submission. So then we have had some discussions actually under a different context. We were in Brussels in October last year for we have a working group on trade which is led by Commerce Department. For that we were in Brussels. There we of course discussed this matter. And then they said that the revised scheme will be introduced from 2024, and then they were looking at the poorest countries to continue this one. They said, but Sri Lanka can still make a submission. So we are now waiting because we are just gathering that information. We have little time, but we will be putting that together and making a submission, asking them to consider that one, given our specific situation. When a country, say the GSP plus country, reaches the upper middle income status, they will give you 3 years because they want to see that country maintains the upper middle income status for 3 consecutive years. So according to the World Bank figures, in 2018 July, because they go by the mid-year, and then 2019 July, when they looked at the figures up to 2018 July, they realized that Sri Lanka has crossed into upper middle income bracket. Now from 2018, they will give you 3 more years. That means 19, 20, 21. And then they will give additional 1 year as a grace period, 2022. And then since it's going to be middle of 2022, they will not implement this from middle of the year. So they will have an extra 6 months. So the exact date of graduation from the GSP plus, provided that we continue the same the income level for this next consecutive years, will be the January 2023. So that will be the day that we have to export under normal duty.